Hello YouTube, thank you so much for tuning in again. Today I actually want to talk about a topic that, I've seen a lot of these popular finance channels like Daniel Pronk, Joseph Carlson, or, Area. I'm a subscriber to these channels and I really love their content. I actually invest in a similar way to these kind of YouTubers. I do want to make this video very short just because I find that, watching these YouTubers, it can, at least as a viewer myself, I find that sometimes it can leave like a fake, almost like a false perception on kind of what companies to look for to kind of get these market beating returns. Because a lot of these YouTubers, they focus on monopolies today, companies with the widest moats that can, you buy these companies and you hold them for years, and in theory, that will actually give you market beating returns. But I think, investing in this way actually ignores a huge fundamental problem, and it might not beat the market, but it might give you only market averaging returns. We have seen, some of these YouTubers mention, their returns are pretty much average to the S&P. And I think the one reason why is when you invest in the S&P 500, you're always kind of buying and selling companies that's done automatically for you. You're going to be, like holding the best companies all the time. That's why it's really hard to beat the S&P 500. I want to explain 3 risks to investing in this way. Just, I'm not against these YouTubers, but I also want you to know like there are risks to investing with this kind of thesis. The first risk is actually buying a company at a bad price, because a lot of the times when it comes to investing in monopolies, we're actually not smarter than a lot of other people. We want to think of ourselves as really smart. We know something the market doesn't, but you're investing with the best of the best in the world. A lot of the times when you're buying wide-moat businesses, they are heavily studied already. So a lot of the times when you buy these businesses, it's really hard to buy them at really good prices. So a lot of the times, like if you think about Costco, for example, it's almost like a perfect business. So a lot of the times these businesses, they are priced to perfection. So when businesses are priced to perfection, what happens is they trade at really high multiples. And in order for the company to kind of expand its price, they had to expand its earnings. And when a company is priced to perfection, any kind of narrow misses can actually shrink the multiple. So a lot of the times when you're buying like, a business that's 50 times priced, the earnings for a bulletproof monopoly, what happens if, like down the road later, an earning miss or something, some regulatory risk, what happens is that 50 times earning can shrink to 20 just like that. And the sentiment on that business becomes pretty poor. So that's number one. It's actually the price of the business. Really hard to buy these monopolies at a good price. That's because they're heavily studied. And when the business is heavily studied, everyone knows it's monopoly. They're going to be trading at premiums. This is actually number 2. This is an example of why I think it's really important to not look at the moat today, but look at the trajectory of the moat. Because a moat of a business is not permanent. This is a really important feature. I find that a lot of the times it's not emphasized in these channels. Because a lot of the times what happens is if you look at a dominant business that's doing well right now, it actually tells you nothing with how the business is gonna be doing in the future. So for example, if you buy like a massive monopoly today, you are buying the best of the best today. But there are companies that have very wide moats that will lose customers. So for example, you will buy a business like Intel 10 years ago. They have one of the widest moats ever. They design the chips. They have the best manufacturing for the chips. And almost no one can actually copy Intel because They own the manufacturing, the best manufacturer. They own the best chip design. So AMD was going to, like going downhill. NVIDIA was hard to compete because they have integrated graphics with their chips that are becoming really good. Unfortunately, that's when TSMC came into the picture, and they kind of took the manufacturing away from the best manufacturing away from Intel, and that's where like competition became more and more stronger, and Intel actually started losing market share because of that, while TSMC is actually gaining at market share. So one business, it's losing its economic moat, while another is actually gaining its economic moat. So a lot of the times it's really hard to like measure the change in economic moat, but you actually have to look at not just businesses with the widest moats today, but also look at companies with narrow moats or non-existent moats, but they are rapidly expanding. You got to think about, NVIDIA in 2015, TSMC back then, right? If you buy only the widest moat, you will miss out on the real wealth creation of these businesses. One way to look at expanding economic moats is actually look at what the management is doing. Really study the management, because a lot of the times, a lot of people look at just the business itself, but they don't look at who's managing the company. What are they kind of deploying their cash into? For example, if you have like a wide moat business with, like billions and billions and billions of dollars of free cash flow, but they're making crazy, like terrible acquisitions, overpriced acquisitions, refusing to buy back its own shares when it's cheap, then you, the shareholder, actually earns nothing of that compounding. So how do you decide when a narrow moat business or a non-existent moat business is gonna get expanded moats? What you want to do is you look at the business itself and the customer, like the retention, the market share of that company. Are they, creating more, ecosystems? Are they kind of like capturing more customers? Another thing is you want to buy these businesses at a great price, so it actually leaves more room for multiple expansion. So really study the management. Look at the management. What are they doing to grow the company? That's what you're looking for. Because, for example, are they aggressively buying back shares? Or are they kind of reinvesting into the business that makes sense for you as a shareholder or you as a person that's researching the business? For example, if a business like a grocery store, are they like a grocery store that's came out with a new concept? Are they like kind of like just buying back their own shares because their business is doing well? Or are they opening another grocery store, in an area that's harder to reach, and in that way they can actually capture more customer, right? And then are those customers that are shopping into your store, can they easily leave? That's what you're looking for in these kind of businesses, right? The grocery store you're kind of investing in is actually a much smaller grocery store, and it's competing against, like a company like as big as Superstore, Loblaw, or Walmart, Costco. They have a concept that's impossible to replicate or really hard to replicate. Like they have that kind of ecosystem, and they are expanding. And it's hard to leave this ecosystem. That's what you're looking for. On top of that, the price of this business is cheap. Those are basic. That's what I consider like a golden business, what you want to really try to look into. Because if you get into early, if you get into these businesses early, I find that's where you get one of the better market beating returns. But in all honesty, I want to make this video really short just to explain why I think it's actually advisable to do a lot of the research and listen to these YouTubers like that have the same thesis. Buy monopolies, hold them for decades, and in theory you'll get market beating returns. But I want you to also understand, just because these are wide moat businesses, Don't ignore the narrow moat or non-existent moat businesses, because sometimes you become blindsided to seeing, the monopolies, but you don't see the trajectory of the moats, because sometimes understanding where the business is going, it's actually more stronger than just what the business is today. So in terms of how I invest is I actually look at strong businesses with, like medium to strong moats. Like they are established, very strong moat businesses. Maybe not the best of the best, but, something to do with the business, market sentiment, like, AI disruption. Is it because of COVID that's, shutting down certain sectors? There's got to be something that, that stimulates like a conversation. Like, you had to pick a side. When you're investing in a company that's trading for cheap, it's almost never a perfect time where it's like, the clouds are clear. There's always a question about the future, the moat of the business, how durable it is. There's always that question. And that's when you get a cheaper price on these kind of businesses. And when it stimulates that kind of conversation and that kind of argument, you have to pick a side. You either, take on the side of, the business, or you take on the side of the narrative. And you pick a side, like even Adobe right now, you have to pick a side. You can't say AI would disrupt Adobe and, and then buy the stock. You can't say AI won't disrupt Adobe and then, like decide to not buy the stock, right? You have to make a decision when it comes to these unclear situations. And that's where I find the strongest returns are gonna be. Thank you so much for watching this really short video on just this topic about economic moats. I just want to make it just because I find that, I've seen a lot of these YouTubers, finance channels that are discussing, like same kind of thesis on economic moats, how to research business, what business to invest in to give market beating returns. But over the recent years, a lot of these YouTubers are, at least what I find, are kind of getting market average in returns or even slightly underperforming the market. And I just want to give a reason why I think that's the case. Everyone has their own opinion, but I kind of want to explain the risk out there so we're not blindly following these YouTubers. And I don't want you to blindly follow, my opinion myself. Write things down. Do your own research. I just hope that we all do well together. That's why I want to make this YouTube video. Thank you so much for watching.